I have a good one, Gary.
All
I
right.
have a good one, and you're gonna like talking about it too. I got a good
All
one.
right.
I posted on social media today that I read a news article yesterday that they polled black teenagers. I think it was in Columbus, Ohio. And these black teenagers said that they experienced 5 experiences of discrimination every single day. I'm going to say that again.
Wow.
They experienced 5 instances of discrimination every day. Here's my theory behind it, because I think that since we are black men, it is okay to say that black men have been wounded by racism in one way or another. Whether they've been discriminated against, whether it's vicariously, whether somebody shared the experience with them, where somebody shared the trauma with them, because we know trauma can be passed down. Here is my theory, that we as black men have been so wounded by racism, we've been so wounded by oppression, that a lot of times we pass this wound down in a way that we make it difficult for our children to carry. Meaning that it's not
Mm,
that oppression is not real. It's not that racism may not be real. It's not that discrimination may not be real, but I do believe that the way it's communicated. So if I communicate racism to my child in a way where I'm not speaking from my womb, but I'm speaking from a place of healing, I think what I deposit in my child is a healthy way to handle racism. It's a healthy way to handle oppression. It's a healthy way to supersede the quote unquote glass ceiling and the chains on the mind and the hands or the feet of the black man. I think sometimes when we speak of racism, we speak from racism and discrimination from a wounded place. And what we do is we pass injury down to our children instead of
mm.
passing healing and hope to our children. Instead of us passing down hope and a bright future, we pass down darkness and anger to our kids. So I want to know what's your take, because I want you to think about it. I did the math. If it's 5 discrimination instances every day, right? If it's 30 days, that's like 150
Yeah.
in a month. No, long no,
Yeah.
it's 35 in a week. At the end of the year, it's 1,825 times that this kid has been discriminated against. What what can we do as black men, that when we pass down, when we talk to our kids about racism, discrimination, and oppression, that we don't speak from a wounded place, but a place of healing, providing we have been healed? It's just something I'm throwing on the table right now,
Yeah.
because that's a shocking statistic, that a teenager feels like they've been discriminated against 5 times. I think some of that may be true, but some of that is we program them so much about the wound of racism that they see it in everything. And I'm not saying I'm totally correct. What's your take on
Right.
that?
Man, I literally, as you were speaking, the word victim and the words victim and victimization popped into my head. And I think just, I want to make sure I'm saying this correctly. Like, I want to make sure that we don't pass on a victim or a victimization
Yeah.
mind frame, right? Because yes, negative things may happen to us, bad things may happen to people, bad things happen all the time to good people. People experience, discrimination, racism, however you want to say it. But I think when we approach it not in a victim's mind frame, but in a, you know what, this is a situation that happened, and I'm not trying to minimize anybody's experience, but this is a
Yeah.
situation that happened, but I am not a victim, and this does not define me. And it doesn't, whatever happened to my ancestors, whatever, I'm acknowledging that because it's real and it's a fact and it's historical fact, while at the same time not letting it define me as a victim. As a matter of fact, I'm strong and stronger, and I've overcome because of those things that happened. Because of the many sacrifices that people made, sometimes willingly or unwillingly, to allow me to have the things and be in the place where I am now, to stand up and be like, you know what? I'm not going to let society, I'm not going to let the narrative, I'm not going to let mainstream media, whatever you want to call it, portray me as a victim. Because as soon as we allow that to happen, we lose our power.
Mm.
You know what I'm saying? We no
Yeah.
longer have
Yeah.
the power to reclaim our own narrative. It's now being created by somebody else. And there, when somebody else creates your narrative, they're gonna be whatever you want them to be every single time. So I would just say, start with looking at yourself in the mirror and just saying, I'm not a victim. I am not
Mm.
a victim, and I will not be a victim, no matter the circumstances. I know, again, people go through rough, very rough, traumatic, tragic things in life. And we hear stories all the time of people coming out on the other end stronger, better, greater, more victorious, more successful. In spite of those things, they learn how to not turn themselves into a victim and succumb to that mind state. So that's one thing that I would say that we could maybe focus on and look at changing the narrative on.
Yes, and I like how you said it too. That because I think when we think about men having wounds, especially as black men, this is a wound that seems to be pretty pervasive. Like we live in a backdrop where everything is made racial. Like if something
Yeah.
happens, and we have to watch how we talk to our children about any type of wound, but especially a wound of racism,
Hmm.
because a lot of times we don't understand that we're passing down anger and venom to our children. I don't think we realize
Yeah.
that. And when you said victim, I don't think that we realize that if we make racism if we make racism bigger than our child, they will become a victim of it. They will become a victim of
Absolutely.
racism because they can't see the end of the road. Meaning, I'm willing to believe that if a black kid feels like they're discriminated against 35 times in a week, some of that is their perception. Some of that is them reading into stuff. Some of that is vicarious wounds. You know what I'm saying? And I
Hmm.
so believe that when you said the victim, we are not victims. And when we talk about wounds, that can be applied to any kind of wound, not just racism. If you were physically abused, you are not a victim. If you were sexually abused, you don't have to be a victim. If you grew up in poverty, you don't have to be a victim. If you were disfigured or whatever, you don't have to be a victim, meaning that we have to be conscious of these wounds because we will pass down the emotion. In psychology, it's called vicarious trauma. And
Mm.
vicarious trauma is something you didn't actually experience on your own, but because you hear about it so much, and because a lot of counselors go through vicarious trauma because we hear people's terrible traumas every day. So it's no different with racism. It's no different with sexual abuse. It's no different with physical abuse. It's no different with wars. It's no different with violence. It's no different with crime. If you hear about this stuff too much, you can become a victim of vicarious trauma. That's why we have to be really cautious about how we share our wounds consciously with our children. So, like we said at the beginning, if I'm not aware of my rejection, I'm not setting boundaries the right way. But if I'm aware that I'm wounded by racism, I have to make sure I'm healed enough to explain that in such a way that I don't wound my kid when I explain it to him.